We're just listening to President Trump campaigning in Columbia, Missouri there for Republican Senate candidate Josh Hawley, the state's attorney general, who is running in a tight race against incumbent Claire McCaskill. Joining me now to discuss is Jason Rosenbaum. He is a political reporter for the St. Louis Public Radio. Jason, thank you for being with us. First, I'd like to note that we did reach out to Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill's campaign. They did not respond to our request. So, Jason, Missouri is a red state with a vulnerable Democratic senator. President Trump won the state by nearly 20 points in 2016. So how much is this race about him?
I would say it's all about him. And I think if Claire McCaskill ends up losing, it's because Missouri residents still have an affinity toward the president that they showcased in 2016. President Trump won Missouri by almost 20 percentage points and caused a lot of Republicans to get elected up and down the ticket. And clearly, someone like Josh Hawley has done the calculation that bringing the president here in the final stretch of the campaign is going to help in a razor-thin race against Claire McCaskill.
So what stuck out to you about the president's messaging specifically to Missouri voters listening to this rally tonight?
I was watching some of the speech, and in particular, the verbiage on immigration stuck out at me. Missouri is a state where both Republicans and Democrats have championed legislation that kind of takes a hard line on immigration. Previously, we had a Democratic gubernatorial nominee. When he was a Republican, he actually sponsored immigration legislation that was written by Kansas gubernatorial hopeful Chris Kobach, who's widely known as like one of the most hardline immigration people in the country, and didn't really repudiate those views when he ran as a Democrat for governor. And you see someone like Claire McCaskill in the last days of the campaign talking about immigration a lot and saying that she supports troops on the border for this quote unquote caravan that is going through Mexico right now. So I think that when President Trump was really talking about that issue and was trying, in his view, to point out some of the weaknesses of McCaskill on that issue, I think it was trying to send a signal to a lot of Missouri voters that Hawley is going to be better than McCaskill on that.
Well, to your point, we did hear the president talk about the caravan of Central American migrants, which is still weeks away from the U.S.-Mexico border. Let's listen.
Oh, yes.
The wall is being built. We spent $1.6 billion. We spent another $1.6 billion this last year. We're getting another one. We want to build it all at one time. We need it. They are doing everything in their power, the Democrats, to delay it and to stop it, and you need the wall. And now it's more obvious than ever.
And so this comes the same day the president announced his plan to limit the U.S. asylum policy. As you know, he recently, said that he would issue an executive order against birthright citizenship, which he called a lunatic policy tonight. How big of an issue is this type of immigration legislation with Missouri voters? They are quite a ways from the border.
Yeah, that's kind of the interesting part, because Missouri is not a border state like Arizona or Texas. But oftentimes you, again, see candidates on both sides of the aisle trying to take a relatively hard line on the issue. And I think that part of that is the demographics. Missouri has a pretty small population of Hispanic and Latino voters. Our next door neighbor in Illinois has a pretty large percentage of Latino Hispanic voters, and they actually have elected a Latino statewide official. So you couldn't probably make that type of message even if you were running as a statewide Republican in Illinois. But because of the demographics, and because labor unions are pretty strong in Missouri, and labor unions have often advocated for more restrictive immigration policies, you again see both parties, and again in this race, both candidates trying to showcase their hardline nature on that issue.
That's interesting you bring up labor unions, though, because the Republicans are certainly no champion of labor unions, and the president has certainly not come out in favor of helping them. So how does that particular issue resonate for Missourians?
Well, McCaskill is clearly hoping that labor comes home to her on Tuesday. In August, Missouri had a vote to repeal right to work, which is a policy that proponents use, or a term that proponents use to describe barring workers or employers and unions from requiring workers to pay dues as a condition of employment. And McCaskill is hoping that the momentum carries through and he can get some key votes in some swing, more conservative counties like Jefferson County, Lincoln County, and Buchanan, Clay, and Platte counties. But the thing that I always point out is in 2016, our now former governor, Eric Greitens, ran on a pro-right-to-work platform. And if you talk to union leaders in Missouri and legislators who are part of labor unions, Greitens got between 30 and 40% of the labor union vote, probably because a lot of labor union people voted for Trump, but also just because that voting bloc can be somewhat unreliable if they're not focused on an issue that is on the ballot, like trying to repeal right to work.
That's interesting. So they will vote for more cultural issues, is what you're saying.
Missouri has always had a socially conservative streak, not only in the rural areas, but also in some of the suburbs. There has been this national narrative about Democrats gaining ground in the suburbs, and there may be suburban areas around St. Louis County, Clay County, Platte County, that Democrats may end up making gains. But the caveat is there are these highly populated suburbs, especially in the St. Louis area, like St. Charles and Jefferson counties, that typically vote for candidates that want to restrict abortion rights and that don't like gun control. And, Josh Hawley is clearly opposed to abortion rights. He has the NRA endorsement. And when you see someone like Trump stumping for him, and Trump won a lot of those counties by wide margins, those are the type of issues that could move voters in very decisive counties that could decide this election.
And so, Josh, I want to ask you about how health care is impacting this race. You've reported on how Senator McCaskill is campaigning on protecting key benefits in the Affordable Care Act. How, then, is the issue of health care impacting this race? We know that it's a very important one to voters across the country right now.
I think it is a vital issue, not just from a rhetorical standpoint, but, because health care has been a major vexing issue in Missouri for years. In 2005, for example, the Missouri legislature cut Medicaid to a fairly low level, which had a major impact on a very poor segment of the population's ability to get health care. We did not expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. And Claire McCaskill, she can't really make an argument like some other Democrats are making that, don't vote for Josh Hawley because he's too close to Donald Trump. Because in a state that Donald Trump won by 20 percentage points, that's not going to be a very successful strategy. So what she's really hammered home on is the fact that Josh Hawley is part of this lawsuit in Texas to repeal the Affordable Care Act through a lawsuit and therefore do away with pre-existing condition protections that people have right now under the Affordable Care Act. It's actually a very ingenious strategy. The Affordable Care Act was used as a bludgeon against Democrats for many years. Now the Affordable Care Act is kind of being used by Democrats like McCaskill as a way to campaign in red states where Trump is popular.
Right, because there are popular provisions of it that have turned out to be much more popular than Republicans anticipated. So, Jason, is that enough of an issue then, that sort of piece of health care, to override everything we were talking about earlier?
McCaskill is certainly hoping so. And I think that she's hoping that an issue like health care, or tariffs, too, because Missouri is a very heavy agriculture state and there's been blowback from the steel and aluminum tariffs, can piece together this coalition that she needs. She needs large turnouts in St. Louis, Kansas City, and Columbia, where the president was actually close to tonight. She needs to win some of those conservative counties that she's won in the past, and she needs to hold down margins in the rural areas. And clearly she thinks that emphasizing health care will bind that coalition together because it's something that all three of those geographic areas with very different views on some issues all need. Right. And if she ends up prevailing, I think a lot of people will be talking about her focus on health care.
It is a universal need. All right, Jason Rosenbaum, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you for having me.
And